Well, welcome back. A Tensas Parish native is making waves in the medical community. Devontae Martin spoke with him and joins us with his story. Devontae?
LaShonda, Dr. Kendrick Johnson grew up in the small town of St. Joseph, but his influence in the world of neurosurgery is anything but small.
First of all, dream big. If I can make it, anybody can make it.
Meet Dr. Kendrick Johnson, assistant professor of neurosurgery at Tulane University School of Medicine. Dr. Johnson is leading a major initiative at Tulane focused on improving stroke care education. Born in Northeast Louisiana and raised in St. Joseph, his efforts are making a difference in his home state. Dr. Johnson revealed his motivation behind the program.
One of the things I care about the most is the care of patients with acute strokes. It's one of the leading causes of death and disability in the United States and worldwide, for that matter. And acute stroke disproportionately affects minorities and poor people and people from rural communities.
Dr. Johnson's passion for medicine was sparked by a personal tragedy, the loss of his grandmother. His cousin, Michelle Morales, says his grandmother always saw something special in him.
She's always said he would be a heart surgeon. She was like, don't let him do this with his hand, don't let him do that. But it's something that she's seen in the spiritual realm about her grandson, and he ended up being a surgeon.
Now he is fulfilling the prophecy as a neurosurgeon. Dr. Aaron DeMont of Tulane described what it's like to work with him.
Dr. Johnson is a phenomenal neurosurgeon. He's a phenomenal doctor, and he's a really great person that cares deeply about people.
In March of this year, Dr. Johnson gained recognition after helping save the life of Ashley Pisano.
Suffered what we call the worst headache of her life, and that's typically from a brain aneurysm that burst. Well, it was God. He might have used my hands, but it definitely was him.
Dr. Johnson also shared plans of bringing his education initiative to Northeast Louisiana. LaShonda?